we're by no means sanctioned out. It's important to note that since President Trump has returned to office, he's only used sanctions in two very discrete instances against Lukoil and Rosneft. And it's also an important note that trade between Russia and the U.S., imports between Russia and the U.S. actually increased last year. There was a 61% increase year over year. And a reminder that Russia wasn't subject to the reciprocal tariffs announced during Liberation Day. So there's a lot more that could be done pressure-wise.
Where should we really think about these peace talks here, or any talks between the U.S., Ukraine, Russia? Kind of what's the status right now, Dan?
So I got to meet with the head of the Ukraine delegation during Davos a few weeks ago. I think the mood on the ground from our team in Kyiv is that the Geneva talks are widely seen as a limited chance of delivering anything. So I think people are largely ignoring those at the moment within Ukraine. From a military standpoint, Russia is continuing to face challenges. Ukraine continues to press further into Russian territory with drone and missile advances. But I think we're towards the beginning of the end, is what President Zelensky said in an interview this morning. But we've not seen the pressure really exerted on Russia from the American president as he's really tried to put on the president of Ukraine.
Dan, excuse me, Paul, go ahead.
Dan, I think what a lot of us kind of just observe is that, boy, unless you get President Putin and Zelensky in the room, either just the two of them or with President Trump, nothing can really move forward. Is that a realistic view?
A lot of this really does rest with President Putin. I think the Zelensky government is pretty joined up on what they want here. The challenge is obviously want to get President Putin to pull back his troops. And we know Steve Witkoff has visited Russia and Putin 8 times since he's taken this role. He's visited Ukraine 0 times. But we need President Trump to apply meaningful pressure in actions, not just words, against Vladimir Putin. We need him to allow the Senate to put forth and on the floor the legislation that Senator Graham and Blumenthal have been proposing for a year now. We've just not seen enough tangible actions to apply more actual pressure on President Putin to bring him to that table directly.
Dan Tannebaum, stay with us, please. Do not go away. With Oliver Wyman, we're going to get the markets open and come back with Mr. Tannebaum here on so much that's going on. It's 8 o'clock. Excuse me.
We got another hour, I think.
You scared me. I looked at the clock and I went, "Are we there already?"
Well,
time flies.
I thought I was out in Chicago. Dan Tannebaum with us, and it's not 9:30 yet. It's 8:30. So we'll continue with Mr. Tannebaum as we can. Dan, I wanted to go back to the idea that seems to be winning, which is Russia will always fight an exhaustive war. All the fancy literature tells me it's the Battle of Borodino, 1812, the Napoleonic Wars, when they held off Napoleon on the way to Moscow. Do you see any indication at Oliver Wyman that the Russians are going to change from exhaustion at any cost?
No, and we've obviously seen their recruiting numbers continue to rise. I think they're bringing in roughly 40,000 new troops a month to losing about 35,000. So, their push towards exhausting the Ukrainians is still the strategy, but we're towards the end of the heating season. The Ukrainians showed great resilience in the face of horrendous attacks on the infrastructure in major cities around Kyiv, and they've come through on the other end stronger and still just as united. So, no, the strategy that Russia's been employing is going to continue.
Dan, what is the role of Europe, the European Union, broadly defined here, whether it's, Germany, France, Poland? Where are the Europeans here? Are they sidelined by the U.S.?
So they're not sidelined by the U.S., and we've definitely seen Europe and the U.K. take strides over the last year to kind of fill in the gap that's been left by President Trump on some of the negotiating issues. The challenge is Hungary, and we've seen European Commission was trying to impose another round of sanctions to coincide with today's 4th anniversary. Hungary threw kind of a flag to limit the speed with which those get passed. But Europe is definitely driving. they definitely, if you're looking at an economic policy standpoint, we need to see actual enforcement. We're beginning to see prosecutions in Germany, in the Netherlands, for companies, for people that would flaunt these sanctions, but there's more that needs to be done.
Do you model out? I'm going to suggest Dan Tannebaum. It's off your remit, but it's Unfair Tuesday. Dan Tannebaum, do you just assume we're going to be talking about this a year from now, or dare I say 6, 7, 8 years, 9 years out?
I think, it's hard to separate the desire from reality. Do I think we'll be talking about this in a year? I think we probably will be talking about this in a year. Assuming that we don't see the U.S. kind of resume to coming on sides with this multilateral coalition fighting Russia, en masse. And that's been the challenge, is really the withdrawal of the U.S. as a driver, as one fighting Vladimir Putin rather than pressuring Vladimir Zelensky to just make a deal and be on with it.
So, Dan, what's the feeling, or do we have any reporting on how the folks in Russia are supporting or not supporting this war? I mean, 4 years for anybody is a long time. I know the Russians have a history of having tremendous staying power when it comes to these issues, but what's the feeling for the average Russian on the ground?
I mean, I think, unfortunately, the reporting out of Russia, as more Western outlets continue to pull out, there's very little real reporting on the ground to know. But it's getting harder and harder to avoid the reality with the amount of losses happening. As you can see, certain reports on Telegram, for instance, of people that are struggling with family members that have been killed, Russians that have been killed on the front. But there's not a lot of objective reporting coming out to really get that sense.